Dhananath Fernando.
Mr. Charindra Chandrasena.
Yasmin, how are you?
Doing good. Hi.
Dhananath, you've had quite a week. Huh? The budget alone would have been enough to keep you busy, but you also had to respond to you drew the ire of a prominent member of the government. Deputy Minister Chaturanga Besingha took exception to something you had posted and said that you were getting your information from some other show. What do you have to say to yourself?
No, basically, we have been working on the state-owned enterprises reform. We, in the sense, like our entire research team, and also I want to, in particular mention, because a lot of people see me being mainly the outspoken person. There's an entire team works behind it. So, yeah, Yasmin and Tirani, Satya, they are a big team who has been working on SOE data for a long time, since our inception. On this matter, the argument was whether the state-owned enterprises are... I think there are a couple of arguments, Suchari. One is whether there's a role for the state to do business, which I understand not everyone is in the same view. Our stance is state should not do business. I think in this case, pretty much the argument was whether the state-owned enterprises for the first 6 months, what has been their profitability. That's another argument. And there was another argument, the state-owned enterprises can be made profitable by appointing honest people. The right people can really transform. It's another argument. There's another argument, for an example, what's the role of countries like Vietnam, China, India, South Korea, Norway? They have some state-owned enterprise. Singapore has some level of holding company. So what do we have to say? So there are multiple versions of these arguments. I think what we brought out was, not we brought out, in the Ministry of Finance, they released the data for the first 6 months. It's a broader analysis of not only the state-owned enterprises, governments, income, expenditure and all that. So for the first 6 months this year, the profits, the total profit, cumulative profits, it doesn't mean all institutions have made profits or all institutions have made losses. There are losses, there are profits, but the total was 227 for the first 6 months out of 52. Now remember, we have a list of about 527 state-owned enterprises. The others, the accounts are not out, whether to figure out whether there's a loss.
These 52 are the strategically important
That's
parts,
what the definition of the government. Whether it's all 52 are strategic or not is a different... Now, Sri Lanka Timber Corporation, whether it's strategic or not, it's in the list. That's a separate conversation. But for some time, those are the 52 strategic. So it's 227 for 6 months. But if you compare the last year's for 6 months, it was 280 billion. So there's a erosion of profits. So that was, I think, probably the point of argument.
But now he's saying you got this data from whatever incorrect source. But you're saying your source is the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, I think anyone can go and check on the treasury.gov.lk. There's this mid-year financial report which is about 50 pages. And the data is available on the 37th page. And they themselves have compared it with the previous year, the profits and losses. So
right. So even the comparison is not yours. Even the comparison you have taken from the Ministry of Finance.
Absolutely. Even if you go to that chapter on state-owned enterprises, what I quoted was what was the exact... Even I didn't write it on my own. It was in the Ministry of Finance report. It basically says the profitability has come... it says it gives mixed performance. That's how you politically write it, no?
Yeah.
And they have given it says on the OU, chapter 3, performance of the state-owned enterprises. I am quoting the Ministry of Finance report, page number 32. It says the main 52 state-owned enterprises within brackets SOEs reported a mixed performance during the first 6 months of 2025, recording a total profit of 227.8 billion compared to 280.7 billion in the same period for 2024.
Yeah. So even in the one that he has shared, it shows the 227. But for 2024, he has the full year figure, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so his comparison doesn't include 2024, the first 6 months.
Yeah, it's just from the same report.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in the chapter 3,
Yeah.
but you can actually check that 227 if you go to the previous year's the same report.
Yeah.
But I think that was the definitely we are struggling to get the data from the institutions because we only publish either it's through the Ministry of Finance or the annual reports. So that's where the data comes from. But with all good intentions, I just wanted to bring the data fact out and not to go for any argument or anything.
If he's saying the data is wrong, then isn't he saying that the Ministry of Finance data is wrong?
I don't want to comment on that. It's basically what I want to say is I took the data from the Ministry of Finance. It's a public report. Anybody can see it from the Ministry of Finance report. And I think the larger argument that I would like to bring, Chari, is there's a sentiment that, okay, let's say, forget that whether they made profits or losses compared to this year, better or worse. There's this 227 billion profit, no? A lot of people think this 227 billion rupees is owned by the people. This is getting distributed among the Sri Lankans. So because of that, you should keep running it. But in the same report, you can see how much these institutes have been given to the treasury. Because ultimately, there's a fundamental concept that we all forget in business. The profits of a business, it should not be the Ministry of Finance. Even if you do like a small tea shop, the profits is for the business. The owner cannot take the profits out. If you are taking the profits out, you are doing more harm to the business because profits are to be reinvested on the business to expand. That's why even on a legal entity, when you register it as a private limited company, the ownership, the business is considered as a person. So the profits are for him. What can be taken by the owner is the dividends, not the profit. So if you look at how much dividends these state-owned enterprises have given to the treasury, it's about 8%.
Right.
So this all 227 billion or like even 1 year, they are not. I will give you a classic example. In 2024, People's Bank for the entire year, they have made a profit of 41 billion. Bank of Ceylon made 106 billion profit 2024 entire year. Remember, 106 billion Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank 41 billion. Can you guess how much dividends People's Bank gave for the treasury?
How much?
Any guesses? 0.
Okay.
Right? It's 0. Right? Let's go to the Bank of Ceylon. Let me try to find out from the... I cannot even see it in the... People's Bank 0, Bank of Ceylon 0. So the two main institutions which has made massive profits. I mean, if you can calculate the profits... Sorry, am I taking too long?
No, that's okay.
The two largest state banks
Two large
in the
state
world.
banks, in Sri Lanka, who have made enormous profits. I mean, their profitability of SO is mainly coming from 3 banks. People's Bank, Bank of Ceylon, NSB, National Savings Bank.
Yeah.
And then, if you make a profit, it's a CEB, CPC because of the monopoly status. Like CEB, of course, you can make CEB profitable very easy. You just need to jack up the prices or like the rates, tariff by 6%, 10%. I mean, it will capture all the profits collectively. Even they can exceed John Keel's profitability because that's the largest pretty much organization. So those two really haven't declared any dividends to the state. Who has given dividends was poor Petroleum Corporation, National Insurance Trust. Those are the guys who have given like dividends, declared dividends. Airport Aviation. Those
So,
are.
Dana, now because you brought up banks, and I want to move on to the budget also on this, but one of the classic arguments that is made by proponents of, I mean, opponents of opponents of privatization is that the private sector is profit driven and therefore will not do anything against their own interests, and especially financial interests, and therefore will not work in the public interest, right? So because you brought up the banking sector, one example could be that a state bank would go to a very rural area in the country which has low volumes and set up a branch there long before it starts coming up as a region, as an area, and the private banks start going there.
Yeah.
So that trail is blazed by the state bank, and if
Correct.
not for the state bank, that segment of the population would not have access to those services in the same way.
Correct. No, valid argument, Shari. No two words about it. And that is the evolutionary process of also the state-owned enterprises. Because for very like highly capital-intensive businesses, including at one point hotels, because not many people were investing in hotels like about 50, 60 years ago. So actually the state had to do hotels. Not many governments or sectors were investing in airlines. So they had to invest on airlines. So that's why that's how they entered the business. But the point is, if you really want to support, you don't support it by doing a business. The structure has to be supporting it in a different way. For an example, Chari, now there is a case all of us may get ill and the ambulance may not turn up. Just risk is there. But it doesn't mean that we are going to buy an ambulance in case if we fall sick, right? And some people may not be able to afford an ambulance. But it doesn't mean that we have setting up like, a separate ambulance company to do it. What you do it is you take care of it in the back end. You provide them additional support in a different mechanism. Agreed that the banks, if they are not reaching out, then you give like incentives for banks. Okay, if you're opening a branch now, same thing even in this budget did. If you're investing in North and East, your capital expenditure allowance is higher than investing in somewhere else. So that gives an incentive for you, link it with the incentives. When you try to do it as a business and support with all good intentions, there are nothing wrong with intentions. I'm saying the effectivity or the efficacy would be lower. If you really want to support people, I am 100%, you set up a separate ministry or something, support them directly through that. Then you're not confusing with objectives, because when you're going to do businesses and if you're trying to make money and support people through business, it's contradicting, because you're doing a business to make profitability and you have to be competitive. And if you really want to support, you do it as a charitable thing or a ministry. Now, education ministry has no objective on making profits, and definitely there has to be an education ministry. And no one is questioning about how much education ministry spend or whether they made a profit or loss. No,
Yeah.
It's a ministry. You do it through the ministry.
Yeah.
But don't try to set up a government to run a university and say that we are going to make profits and then we are going to invest that profit on developing the education.
Okay, so I think the maybe the close example is state schools and state universities. I suppose that's what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Because ministries in involvement and ministries necessity, I don't think anybody's contesting that.
Absolutely, not neither way.
State schools and state universities. You're saying
Run it. I mean,
Yeah.
states support with the Ministry of Education, but if you don't try to do a business and support it, because it's contradicting to Charin. I mean, business. There's a famous saying that the business of business is business. So you have to run the business like a business. When you try to bring other objectives to the business, then your business and your objective both collapse. අර සිංහලෙන් තියෙන ණයට දීමෙන් ණයද මිතුරාද දෙකම නැති වෙයි කියලා. So when you try to do these sort of all sort of stuff, you lose. And exactly that's what has happened. I mean, I have told it multiple times. When Petroleum Corporation make losses, CEB make losses, they borrowed money from Petroleum Corporation. Now what happened? The CEB issues has spilled it over to Petroleum Corporation. Then Petroleum Corporation scratching their head and thinking, what are we going to do? Okay, one good, brilliant idea. We'll ask Sri Lankan Airlines only to buy jet fuel from us. And at very high cost. Now what has happened? Sri Lankan Airlines, buying fuel at exorbitant rates, and fuel cost is one of the main cost factors for the airline.
It's a disease.
Absolutely. And now everyone is blaming Sri Lankan Airlines, including, not blaming, asking them to, poor Sri Lankan Airlines, they had to buy, of course, they have a lot of mismanagement and all that is true. But that is how it evolves. Now the problem of CEB had ended up in Sri Lankan Airlines. Now all those people have gone to People's Bank and Bank of Ceylon. Now they have I'm also saying the People's Bank and Bank of Ceylon, they have extended credit for about 600 billion. 600 billion for these institutes. Now you can see the problem evolving. If it's a private bank, you declare bankruptcy, then it's over. Now you have come up with good intentions, but now look where we have ended up. Even the president has mentioned now he's going to absorb most of the state enterprises' liabilities and clean it up. That means the taxpayer is going to take the bill. So that's where we need to understand the first principles thinking rather than just carried away just with profit numbers or just with loss numbers, and also identifying that evolutionary process. There was a time when I don't think anyone challenged that. As I mentioned, the Hilton Hotel, the Oberoi, those were even the Trans-Asia or like the Cinnamon, not the Cinnamon Grand, Cinnamon Lakeside was a state hotel at one point. Because no one invested for tourists to come, and of course state did their role, but it doesn't mean that you keep it forever. It's just because that you need an ambulance doesn't mean that you own it and park it at your garage every day just because in case if you fall sick.
I think the government is now coming to this realization, right, that because there are things being said like "Andu business karan onne" and all of that. So I think they're gradually coming to that realization, and maybe that's part of the evolution of the party as well. Hopefully, yes.
I think we have to give Yasmin the chance. She has been she had been working harder than I got the spotlight. But on the budget work.
Yes. Now we are moving to the budget. Yasmin, what are your overall high-level thoughts? Is it a growth budget?
I think yes. Because at least we see policy continuity. I think that's the main thing. I don't think, we were just discussing that doesn't seem to be too much of a difference between the 2025 budget and the 2026 budgets. Most of the policies, most of the things that were, they said they would do previously, it's still continuing. So we're not seeing any sort of backtracking or anything like that. I think, personally for me, I wish we had seen some, better proposals in some areas. For example, when it came to women, I think that there was just only one proposal related to, I think, money that's allocated or set aside for entrepreneurship. But I think, even that, this is what always happens, right? Money is always set aside for entrepreneurship, but how, and some of those processes are not yet outlined, right? And maybe the budget speech is not the best space to do that, but I think through the years, there should be some sort of, it should be outlined, how will that sort of play out? So that was one thing that struck me. I think we were also discussing how, there's a lot of money that's being allocated in terms of construction and housing, but I think the bigger thing that has not been addressed is this issue of high costs of construction, because nothing has been sort of proposed to address that as a big problem. Because if you want to really see growth, businesses have to come and set up here, right? And to do that, they need to find it viable to come and set up here, and one of the biggest cost factors is the cost of construction. So those were some of my preliminary sort of observations, sorry. But yeah, I think
But what Yasmin said was very interesting. The consistency is also in a way growth friendly.
Yeah.
I found it very I mean, a lot of people think like what more proposals are there, but
Yeah.
sorry, yes.
No,
But the
no.
consistency
But when it comes
is-
to consistency, consistency can lead to growth, but can it be leapfrogging growth, or is it just going to be incremental growth, which is not at the speed that we need to be growing at this stage?
I think the more important question is like, okay, yeah, the good thing is that there's consistency, but like what's the level at which this implementation will even happen? Like, I think that's the bigger sort of question. So, I mean, there are some very important structural reforms that the government needs to undertake in order to sort of achieve growth, right? Some of them being the state-owned enterprises, like reforming of state-owned enterprises. So I think they've said now that they're going to fast track the bill, they're going to present it in parliament. That kind of promise is being made, but we don't know,
Yeah,
right?
but I think adding to what Yasmin said, her point on implementation, because Shari, most of these leapfrog reforms pro growth are already in the budget and even in the previous budget. For an example, this BIM Savia, which we proposed. No, we are not saying because we proposed it. Of course, it's a program which is existing. And then even the tariff structure simplification, which was also highlighted this time, is already there. The investor protection legislation that they are going to bring, the SOE holding company, public-private partnership act. If you recall, there was also a conversation, I really cannot recall it was under this president, but even the previous budget on bankruptcy laws. Those are all leapfrog growth reforms, because how the growth comes, it's not by government investing more and more money. They have to do the investment on public infrastructure, which actually they are considering. They have allocated money for digitization. President has committed 4% capital expenditure from the budget as a percentage of GDP.
This infrastructure-led growth, what are your guys your view on this as advocata and maybe even individually? Because there's a school of thought that believes that is not really sustainable, right? Because you create jobs, you create a certain economy around these infrastructure projects, but it's temporary and it's not the best way for long-term growth.
Correct. Now, how I see it, Chari, Yasmin, you want to take a stab at it?
I mean, I think the prime example would be like all the construction and infrastructure development that has happened in Hambantota, but like, do we really see the economy there? Like,
when you take Hambantota as an example, I don't really want to paint infrastructure with that brush, right? Because Hambantota, I feel, is an exceptional case because the infrastructure was put up without the conditions being right for it, right?
Correct.
But if you take a more developed area, which is more central in terms of the economy and connectivity, I think there is a place for infrastructure development. But even in those, so we'll forget about the bad example of Hambantota, but tell me from a very moderate lens and say a moderate location, is infrastructure-led growth the way to go for Sri Lanka?
I think it has a role to play.
Yeah, it has a role to play. The thing is, Chari, when you're saying infrastructure-led growth, there are certain infrastructure which is needed to grow.
Exactly.
For an example, let's say the airport expansion. That is needed for growth, for tourism and the downstream growth. So that is required. When we say what happened, that infrastructure-led unwanted growth was because we have to keep the first principles in mind. Construction is a non-tradable. That means it's not open for competition. If it's like exports, that's why we say the growth has to come from exports, because growth can come in multiple ways. No, you can borrow more money and grow. You can build more things by borrowing money and grow. But when it comes on competitive environments, like where you produce something which is world-class, competitive, you trade, that's the growth that we need. But when it comes to infrastructure, there are basic infrastructure which is required, which facilitate growth or which helps to other industries to be competitive. For an example, if your electricity rates are competitive because of some government infrastructure, let's say if they do a massive like water reservoir or something which the private sector really do not have the interest to do it, then by bringing down the energy cost down, you're making most of the upstream and downstream industries competitive. So in that sense, it's in a way infrastructure. That infrastructure investment will also continue to grow, but that the output of that infrastructure investment will have a massive spillover effect for the private sector for them to facilitate more. So I think that's what we mean.
Yeah.
So that's why you are not overspending. You are only keep it at 4%, which is in a way reasonable. On the other thing, we have to look at where the government is going to finance that 4% to build that infrastructure, because ultimately the banks only have limited money. So if they are extending it only for the government to build this infrastructure, if there's no money for the private sector, they will be in trouble. So there you have to check where the money also comes from, whether it comes from a more competitive environment, because then the credit flows for where it is needed the most, because you can only have credit when you know this is compatible. For an example, if the credit is available on a competitive basis, then the investor can think, okay, whether it's more feasible to invest it on a solar or whether it's more feasible to invest in a road, because he can say, okay, solar I get a better ROI, ROA, but road may not. So automatically your limited credit goes to a productive output rather than an unproductive output. That's where we have to we have to be cautious, but infrastructure is needed. That's what the public could not, the private sector could not provide. And even coming to the SOE argument, that was probably the objective, that the state invested their money, because they thought when you invest in a hotel, there are more job opportunities created that will create cottage industries and all that. So here now the phase has advanced, things have evolved. So we have to look at public infrastructure for sure.
One example would be the Colombo Kandy, the Central Expressway. Because not just Kandy, that is going to benefit so many towns along that stretch.
Exactly.
And it's going to make travel to Anuradhapura and that area easier. It's just the spillover, even the East Coast is going to, the distance is going to be cut down. So major benefits through that, and I don't know why it took so long in the first place, but now that's good infrastructure.
Correct.
So that's
what's your also yes, no, absolutely. What's your sentiment, Shari, like in terms of President said it's 4% on public sector, and you feel the growth is not covered enough in the budget?
No, so I'm just wondering what is going to be, so what is the main driver of growth? Because digitization, I'm still unclear how much growth it's going to create immediately, Dana. For me, the immediate benefit would probably be in terms of maybe cutting costs, especially for government services. If you get rid of the paperwork and you make it more efficient, more convenient, then I feel like the costs will come down. And yes, I suppose that will lead to greater profits. But I'm thinking in terms of national level growth, whether digitalization is the one that's going to get that for us immediately. What are your thoughts? Am I wrong on that? Or?
No, I think on the digitization, it will take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But that's a long haul
Yeah.
game. Because even if you look at this budget, there's a little trick, not a trick. There are no new taxes.
Yeah, well, I mean, no new taxes, but then when you lower the threshold,
Absolutely.
it is a new tax for the people who didn't get that tax earlier.
Not only that, with that, they are going to introduce, if it all works, RAMIS 3.0. That collects everyone's, it makes the system more efficient. Then they are going to introduce an e-invoicing system. That means all invoices that you raise, so then pretty much everyone, whether you are under the VAT threshold or above the VAT threshold, automatically indicated. And then they are going to implement POS machines to most of the outlets. So then it's like more, you can see the sequence that it is coming. So digitization is needed for that. And then the next, if you listen to the budget speech also highlights about the land and, giving state land and digitizing it and all that, some BIMSAVIA or something, some land management system flavor is there. So all that you can see coming, but it requires its own sweet time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It
That's
may
right. So
not-
I'm thinking 2026. Is there anything that's going to get us, that level of growth boost? And I don't know whether I saw anything. But in the long run, yes, because now the digital ID, I heard that they are putting out the first one in March, but I think for it to be fully implemented, they're thinking maybe 2028. That's what I've heard. So that's a long haul, like a long game. And I think once that happens, that's going to be a paradigm shift in the economy in Sri Lanka's, access to services and all of that. I'm just thinking about 2026. What are your thoughts, Yasmin?
No, I think you're right in the sense that it's most, when we say they are growth inducing proposals, like there is potential for growth, I don't think you will see growth next year. Like they're continuing to sort of lay the building blocks for growth that, is more sustainable. So that's what I said earlier, like policy continuity is one of the biggest things that you can sort of rely on for you to, because you're working towards a path, you're working towards a defined goal. So when you ensure that there's consistency between budgets, then obviously, because I guess when you have a previous administration that did something and a new administration that comes in and they change the policy all over, time is delayed, so it really does pull back on the growth, trajectory. Let's take, for example, the SOE bill. Even the previous administration said they were going to pass it, it never went through, right? And then when the new administration came in, there was this need to sort of re-examine what the previous administration had drafted. And so, time gets sort of, it goes, right? So then obviously the potential to see growth faster is also delayed. So, that's just my 2 cents, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the growth challenge is anyway there. We have to work. Likely it may come also to an extent from, public infrastructure development. But we have to definitely do that legislation changes to take it to the next stage, for sure, because otherwise we will stuck here. And the other, things we could have improved was, Chari, I felt there are a lot of small allocations, like number of ones, like hundreds of small allocations, but I felt it could have, if we had overarching strategy that how we really see it, could have been better. I'll give you one example. Now, if you go to this year February budget, there was an allocation of 3,000 million, that's 3 billion for the Metro bus, which is yet to be implemented. I think there's conversation going, there's some work happening there.
Yeah, they did a launch recently,
They did a launch
soft launch probably.
And this year we allocated another 6 billion against a public infrastructure. But for the double caps for parliamentarians, whatever, I think definitely they need a vehicle. And good that President said no permits, 100%, respect.
Yes.
But it's 12.5 billion. So you give a signal that your public, of course, this 6 billion is the new investment anyway for SLTB and all that. There may be for railway department, there are recurrent expenditure, all that is anyway captured separately in the recurrent expenditure. This is new proposal. There's a two directions. So you are giving 12.5 billion for 225, and you're
saying it sends the wrong signal
it gives a wrong
to the
signal.
public about what the priorities of the government are.
Absolutely. So that's where we should not avoid the capital expenditure. So I think that's why I said incentives matters, because I thought what they could have thought was we give a vehicle allowance based on a criterion. If you are an Ampara district MP, your vehicle allowance may be slightly higher, fuel allowance is anyway higher. Then you are not now, when you buy 1,000 odd cabs, you have to take care of the maintenance, insurance, parking, drivers, everything, right? it's a nightmare. You have to have a separate office running fleet of 1,700 vehicles is no joke. No, I mean, even running your own vehicle is a difficulty to make sure that it's licensed on time, insured on time, and is also difficult. Imagine 1,700. This is like a separate operation. You have to have a separate office to run it. Isn't it easier that you give like an allowance for MPs? You give 300,000 or some allowance for vehicle. You use whatever the vehicle you want. It can be a double cab, it can be a tuk-tuk, it can be a V8. Who cares? If you have money, you add more money, or you can buy your vehicle, you can lease it.
Yeah.
You know, you make
But
it
you give it a minimum amount to make it possible.
So then economy works, and good that it's not coming as a permit. But could have thought whether there's a separate. So then it's incentives, and also person who owns the vehicle taking care is also better now,
Yeah.
because now when someone else's vehicle, they will use it for all sorts of things. So that's where the thinking has to come. I think that's, and also I think what president could have done was, because the strength was 2025 revenue numbers were extremely good, right? Because we have pretty much exceeding the revenue targets, not the budget deficit. I think a little thank you note for the taxpayer could have made a difference, because people were complaining about you remember 36%, the highest threshold, 15% on dollar revenue services. Just to say, I'm here because, and I'm starting with a very positive note, I'm bringing confidence. We have achieved the revenue targets. Also, thanks to people who contributed, and we haven't, it's an emotional thing. I'm surprised that he missed it. That gives not that we understand you are paying it with greatest difficulty, and I have assured that I have given my best to save your money.
Yeah,
You know?
I suppose that I am also surprised he missed it, because it's unlikely him to miss a moment like that. Right? He seems to know his moments, but I think the argument that he may make is that people are more willing to pay their taxes because they know that we are going to not misuse, and that is not going to go for corrupt purposes. So I suppose he could take some credit for that as well.
Yasmin, you have some data to...
Yeah, no, I mean, our team just crunched the numbers a little bit, just very basic comparisons between last year's budget versus this year's budget. So just in terms of our revenue itself, like, I think it's obviously, like, we're estimating that we'll collect more than even last year. Last year, it was about 5,042 billion rupees. This year, we're aiming to, collect around 5,305 billion rupees.
So that's about 200 billion more revenue that we are planning to collect.
Yeah.
Then in terms of expenditure also, like, the good thing is that we have a little, I mean, actually it has increases, but a little bit, actually, just a little bit. So last year it was around 8,835 billion rupees. This year it's 8,980 billion rupees. So that also, I think, it's just coming from, both recurrent has also reduced. Capital has also capital has increased. That is where I guess the increase is coming from. So last year recurrent was 5,920 billion rupees. This year it's 5,722. Last year capital was 2,915 billion rupees, and this year it's 3,258. So there is significantly a lot more we're spending in terms of capital expenses this year.
Yeah, because last year was about stabilization mainly, right? Now they have to think about some sort of development. So
yes, that's true. That's true. And I guess I also just have, like, in terms of, like, the main ministries that people would be most interested for example.
Interesting, it has moved away from the defense, no?
Yeah.
Earlier it was everyone complains about defense. I think still it's a
It is one of the highest, but
It's one
then,
of the highest.
like, at least you see bigger, like, for example, health is much more, right? So, like, health last year was 442 billion. This year it's 455 billion. Anyway, that's a natural increase every year because of all sorts of reasons. It sees an increase, but at least it's not one of the top highest, right?
And health is bunched together with
mass media.
the media ministry, right? So these days we don't really know exactly how much health is getting. But
education, higher education, and vocational education, last year it was 272.9 billion, and this year it's 301 billion. Transport also, it's transport, highways, ports, and civil aviation. Last year it was 487.5 billion, and this year it's 446 billion. So, so those are just some very key statistics, I guess, for people to take away in terms
Right.
of expenses.
That's interesting. But like before we wind up, just one thing, and one of you can answer this or both. The president took pains to introduce to rather reiterate that there will not be an issue with our debt repayments in 2028. He said that this 2025 the debt repayments were a percentage higher, was X percentage higher than 2024, and then they're paying it all. And the debt repayments in 2028 are only going to be a percentage higher than they are this year, if I haven't got it wrong. So that the 2028 percentage is going to be only a little higher than the percentage from 24 to 25, percentage increase from 24 to 25. So he's saying, don't worry, we are the government that's going to be there in 2028. We will pay it off. You agree?
Yeah, very interesting question, Chari. I'm glad that you asked that. Now we need to understand how this game works. This works, there's a famous saying, how you go bankrupt? You go bankrupt slowly and suddenly. Now, in this momentum, very unlikely that we will default because everything is functioning well. But generally, this default risk or like debt repayment challenges comes with a trigger event because everyone sends remittances, tourist comes, everything happens in a normal environment. One trigger event, everything is going to shrink. So president is right. If this momentum, that's why you remember we always say keep the stability, don't deviate, stick to as much as possible to the IMF program. Of course, IMF is not a solution for all problems, but you cannot really deviate because that framework is set to run the machine. One trigger event can collapse. So president is absolutely right. Now I think increments are small, so we can pay. But the challenge comes if there's an unfortunate event. It could be a weather event. It could be some geopolitical event. It could be anything. In that context, we may face a challenge because as we already know, then while we have recovered, our credit rating is still at a C level. So in a way that we are not fully recovered in that sense. But of course, it will take time. But absolutely, you can pay, but you're cautious of a trigger event.
Yeah.
Remember, in 2015, there was central bank bond scam. 16, there was drought. 17, there was drought. 18, there was constitutional coup. 19, there was Easter attack.
attacks,
20, there was COVID. 21, there was COVID. 22, there was economic crisis. So there were a lot of trigger events took place, and I think that was like කේන්දරේ කියන්නේ රාව කාලේ හරි අපලමක් හරි ඒ රාෂ්ට්‍රයක් තිබුණා. But luckily හෙනවුරා තිබුණා. So 2023, 24, touchwood, 25, there were no extreme.
No, but this trigger event theory is interesting because 2020, at the turn of that decade, is when the tax cuts were given. Right? And then in March, I think March 19th maybe, lockdown. So I'm thinking, would the lockdown have affected us so bad if those tax cuts were not implemented? But I think we were on a bad wicket anyway in that year without the tax cuts even. But I think the tax cuts has exacerbated the issue. So I'm just thinking that trigger event could have been COVID, but then there were conditions for COVID to create havoc as well in the economy.
Absolutely, you were spot on because one bad mistake can sometimes you can survive it for some time, but when you have the combined impact of all events, then that's where the suddenly part comes in. Because
at that time it was all about saving lives, so that's one of the strictest lockdowns we had in the world, I think. Right? So like, don't put your foot out of your gate even, like you'll get COVID. So I mean, interesting. But your final thoughts, Yasmin?
No, I think we're all good. I think
the implementation is the next challenge, important thing. Yes, and even now VAT, by bringing the threshold down, means I think a lot of businesses has to be cautious. Not cautious. They need to understand now they have to be prepared to pay VAT, because 100,000 a day. If you are earning 100,000 a day by doing a trading business or anything, that means we are falling under VAT. Basically, a Rahima, few steps from here,
Yeah.
pretty much
Yeah.
will be liable for VAT. 100,000 is nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, daily collection 100,000
Of course,
is
yeah.
it's a small amount. So that, but the real impact will come from the SSCL threshold has brought down. Now the VAT is one of the best tax systems in the world, because you're only paying for the value addition. The Rahima, same example, they bring rice, they bring spices, they cook it. So they have to only pay the VAT for the value addition that they do. So they bring probably they cooking and that whatever their recipe and serving, and that they have to pay VAT. Rice and all that they can deduct it. But SSCL, they cannot deduct. So if they are supplier, rice supplier, basmati supplier, whoever has to pay SSCL, that will add to when Rahima do their
Purchases,
cost
yeah.
purchase. So then now their material cost is going to go up by 2.5%. Then that has to be incorporated
knock-on
to their
effect of
costing,
that,
knock-on effect. And if we are supplying through Rahimas, that has to be added. If you are using Rahimas biryani as an input for,
Yeah.
this seems like free publicity for Rahimas.
I know, right?
If you are using it for, for something else, then we have to charge it on top of it. So then there's a cascading impact.
Yeah.
So that you have to be cautious. Maybe we should go and ask for some biryani from Rahimas for this.
This episode is sponsored by. Well, I mean, hopefully it will help them improve their quality, because I was a fan back then. But not so much now. But yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Subscribe.
Charindra, yeah.
Tell subscribe.
You tell.
You subscribe Advocate Institute first.
We let her tell. No?
Yes.
People should like, comment, share, and subscribe to Advocata.
Absolutely. And also the Advocate Insider. I think we are bringing quite interesting content specifically for the small and medium businesses. And also one reason. Now this is the important thing. Now a lot of this free content brought to our audience is because of the Advocata's insiders. And while you can get like free content, there's another reason why you should support us. That is, Chari, being an independent think tank is, or like independent on any sort, it could be media, is not easy, because you get shot by both sides, right? So I kindly request, because we are trying to bring a apolitical, non-partisan view. Of course, people who are watching has political views, people who are associated as political views, but we are trying to bring on a more data-driven approach. We may do mistakes because this is also important. Even if you have a political affiliation or a view, it's always important to know what's the neutral views. We can only do that with the support of our insiders.
Yeah.
So that's why we kindly request.
Because the think tank space is not a lucrative space as such, no?
Absolutely.
Right? This is not a lucrative industry. So it is not easy to keep going on. And especially if you are not being, funded by one political party or another, then your coffers are fine. But if you are trying to be independent, then it's a bit difficult. So yeah.
There's an interesting, good reason because otherwise, the politicians also easily target the think tanks, because it's easier, because that's how the politics works. But you can keep us independent, and we will also be accountable to you, because then we know, again, we are as a think tank also open for market forces, because if you don't provide an independent view, then we are losing our subscribers and insiders. So we as a think tank also want to bring that market sentiment, to be open for the market dynamics, to be to provide a more balanced, non-partisan and independent data-driven analysis. Become an insider.
Right. All right, Dhananath. All right,
Thank you,
Yasmin. We
Charindra.
will see you next week. Right?
Next week.
Yes.